Principles. Successful language learners might have different methods or ways of learning, but they all stick to certain key principles. These principles lead their learning journey. In this section, we're going to cover these principles. No matter what language you learn, what method you use, you need to stick to the following principles to acquire the language rapidly. Number 1. Learn, don't study. Language learning is not an academic subject to study. It's not like math. It's acquiring a set of skills. I like to think of it as bodybuilding. You train your muscles, your brain, and your tongue and ears. It's more of a psychological and physiological training than academic learning. This is one of the reasons you can't learn a language in a school. I hate to break it to you, but schools of today teach all about theory and hardly use knowledge. It fails to teach applicable skills. Studying grammar books for years, making endless drills, playing with flashcards will not make you speak a new language. One day, you won't wake up and speak the language unless you stop learning the same way you do in school and start training to acquire the skills and language. Let me tell you about how this learning works in more detail. Ears. Each and every language has its own melody, and it is quite elaborate. At the very beginning of your learning journey, you can only recognize the language. You hear people speaking it, and you say, "Oh, they are speaking Spanish." With time, you start to recognize new sounds, intonations, stresses, and other patterns. You start appreciating all aspects of this melody. You can even differentiate between the nuances of the sounds. But how does this happen? We have language filters in our brains that filter in sounds that we are familiar with and filter out sounds that we are unfamiliar with. So the more you listen and focus on the language, the more your ears and brain start to filter in the sounds, and the melody of the language reveals itself. Therefore, you have to actively listen to your target language in order to train your brain to let in the new sounds. Brain. Language learning depends on recognizing patterns. If you look at it from an input standpoint, language consists of vocabulary and grammar patterns. In order to understand and speak the language, your brain has to be very familiar with these patterns. Whatever you do to learn a language, your brain needs to be exposed to the different patterns of the language so many times so that it soaks them up and they become automatic, so that you don't have to think hard when you need them. Tongue. Each and every language has distinct sounds. For example, Spanish has a rolling R, German has a glottal H, French has a soft R, and Arabic has a lisp S. You need to be able to make those sounds to speak properly, and there is only one way to learn to make them: practice. You need to watch and hear a native speaker and try to produce the same sound. You need to see where they place their tongue to produce the sound. Number 2. Motivation. Here is the most common language learning story. John wanted to learn X language, say Spanish. He started learning it, but then something came up and he quit. Well, he still wants to learn. He says one day he'll speak the language, but wanting is not enough. Even though language learning is not as hard as most people think, it still requires quite a lot of effort. It needs to be a priority of yours. And most of the time, we start with a lot of motivation and then lose it. To be successful in this journey, we need both long-term and short-term motivation. In the 4th chapter, I'm going to share with you the strategy used by polyglots to stay motivated. Here in this course, I'm going to give you all the tools you need. Imagine you met a polyglot. He speaks 50 languages and he gives you all the secrets of language learning. Now, if you don't have the motivation or lose it in the middle of the road, all these things you learn, do they mean anything? You know the answer. So maybe one of the biggest secrets in learning to speak a foreign language is maintaining the motivation to do so. Simple interest in the language itself, the people who speak the language, their culture, or a little childish itch that makes you want to speak that language will suffice to fulfill the motivational need. But even that personal interest may fade when you come up against difficulties or have other things to do. So even being intrinsically motivated at the beginning may not be enough. Picture New York City. You can find a lot of foreigners who live there more than 10 years who don't speak English. Or picture an expat community in any country. They live in their own bubble and they don't speak the language, because none of these people needed to learn the language. They live with their families. They have their own friends who speak their language too. So if you really want to learn a foreign language, you should change your mentality from want to need. From should to must. You need to say, I must learn this language because I really want to meet Spanish people and communicate with them in Spanish. I must learn Chinese because I want to do business in China. I must learn Turkish because I want to learn about Turkish culture. I must learn about X because I want to learn about Y. I'm going to tell you what strategies polyglots use to keep themselves motivated later on, and the next principle will also help you through a motivational problem. Number 3, relevance. You need to focus on language content that is relevant to you. Your goals and interests must be an important criteria to choose the material you're going to use. The learning must be meaningful to you, because meaningful learning is much more effective at long-term retention than rote learning. If your primary reason is speaking the language, then you should focus on that. You shouldn't put your energy into learning academic words or reading novels. Also, when you are over the threshold level, when you are more comfortable to understand the main idea of what you read or listen to, you need to pick content that matches your interests in your native language. Do not watch or read about something that you wouldn't do in your native language. One thing polyglots do is they focus on the content that is related to their interests. They use the language as a vehicle to learn more about their interests. They say what keeps them motivated is the desire to learn and achieve things about their interests that they can't do in their own native language. For example, Tim Donor is interested in Persian culture and he wants to read Persian poems. So he learns Persian from poems and novels so that while he is achieving his goals faster and more efficiently, he learns relevant vocabulary based on his needs and he keeps himself motivated. My polyglot professor, Shane McCallum, is very interested in international politics, so this gives him a motivation to learn almost every language. One of the reasons meaningful learning is more effective is associations. Linking new information with existing information already stored in our long-term memory, and this helps us learn new things faster. So skip learning a language for the sake of learning it and enjoy your interest in your target language. Wouldn't that be more fun? Number 4, routine, consistency. Sticking to a routine is one of the ultimate secrets. It is often said that we are creatures of habit, in that many of our daily activities end up being a matter of routine rather than direct deliberation. This is extremely true for language learning. Consistency is very important. Now this may come as a shock, but polyglot Kato Loam, who speaks more than 17 languages, once said, "The time spent on language learning is lost unless it reaches a certain daily and weekly concentration." Let me repeat that for you. The time spent on language learning is lost unless it reaches a certain daily and weekly concentration. Each and every polyglot has their daily routines. And pay attention here. The key word is daily. If you want to learn a language rapidly, you need a daily routine. You should get exposed to the language and learn every day. Only half an hour to an hour is necessary, but it must be done every day. Then use your dead time for listening, while you are waiting in line, driving, cooking, cleaning up. If you stick to your routine for a couple weeks, it will become a habit and produce results. This is why learning a language in school is very difficult, because the time spent on learning in classroom is lost. It is not concentrated. People think that you can't learn a language in a short time, but actually you naturally learn it in a short time because you need to learn consistently. Putting an hour every day adds up to a much bigger number compared to learning in a classroom. In the next chapters, I'll show you how you can build your own learning routine. Number 5, your psychological state matters. It is difficult to learn a language if you are under stress, anxious, or worried. All of these states impair your memory and learning. If you are relaxed and curious, you are going to learn the language more quickly. Try to clear your mind before sitting down to study a language. If you are constantly thinking about life's stresses during your study time, your learning will be impaired. Try an activity like stretching for 5 minutes before you begin studying to transition your mind into learning mode. Think of learning a language as a hobby. Think of it as a relaxing activity you do for enjoyment. Another big obstacle that discourages or prevents many people from learning a language is ambiguity. You'll face tons of ambiguity in the beginning of your learning journey and some later, and it might frustrate you. You must be tolerant of ambiguity. Otherwise, when native speakers talk to you and you don't understand a couple words, you will be stressed. Or you read something or you watch something in your target language and you don't understand many words in the beginning, it shouldn't stress you out. I know how stressful and frustrating this process can be, but it's okay. I guarantee you, it doesn't matter how much effort you put in, you'll go through an ambiguity process, and you won't understand everything. If you can tolerate ambiguity and not be frustrated with it, you will achieve fluency, and 4 or 5 unknown words in a conversation or article won't bother you anymore. You are going to utilize the context and understand the message. Number 6. Languages are not taught, they are learned. The most important thing of all to understand when one is learning a language is that the key word is learning. Languages cannot be taught, they can only be learned. People think learning a second language is very hard and slow because they don't apply this principle. They say, "Wow, did you learn that language on your own?" Well, actually, that is how I learned it. Teachers can't do the learning for you. This is the number one reason why so many of us can't learn a language in school. Teachers can't fill brains with language skills. We tend to believe that essential thinking work is going to be done by the teacher. Successful learners put all the effort in themselves. You can do much better with way less effort if you rely on yourself. Language learning has to be carried out by individuals on their own. It is a process of observation that has to be done solo. So you should lead your own learning journey, not the teacher's. Teachers should guide you when you are stuck. Teachers should do what you cannot do yourself. But don't fool yourself, you can do most of the learning. So in order to succeed, you must take active control of your learning journey. Number 7. Risk-taking. Making mistakes. The biggest obstacle that keeps you from achieving fluency is fear of making mistakes. But let me tell you the secret of learning a language. Make as many mistakes as possible. Yes, you heard it right. It all comes down to this. But how? The only way to progress is actually trying to do it. And the greatest indicator of your effort is making mistakes, because making mistakes is inevitable in something as complex as learning a language. The more you make mistakes, the more you're trying and actually learning. So you tried to talk to someone, forgot the words, screwed up the grammar, couldn't understand what was being said to you, and felt defeated. Well, you just moved forward. That failed attempt moved you closer toward not failing next time. It is an opportunity to reflect on those challenging conversations and look at the positives of your speaking experiences. It wasn't a failed attempt, it was a learning curve where you felt outside of your comfort zone in which you identify your mistakes so you can improve. For most people, the main purpose of language learning is to enable communication. So nobody cares if you pronounce something wrong as long as they understand the meaning. From learners in the average classrooms to master polyglots, the speakers who make more mistakes actually communicate better. Looking back on my younger self, I had quite a rich vocabulary since I used to do a lot of research on my interests using the English language, and I would do very well on grammar tests. According to the testing system, I was a very good English speaker. But despite that, I wouldn't speak a lot in the class because I was afraid of making mistakes, even though I didn't admit it to myself back then. And there was this girl. She would talk a lot with her very limited vocabulary, and she would make mistakes here and there, and I would pity her. Well, now I can see why I couldn't speak English despite all that vocabulary I had. Don't wait to put your skills in action. Go make mistakes. I know we tend to wait until our skills are perfect, but remember, your skills won't get better if you don't put them in action as soon as possible. A lot of people spend so much time studying a language, but since they start trying to speak after so long, their progress is very slow compared to polyglots. Polyglots try to speak it as early as possible, whereas most people just waste time waiting for the perfect moment to try to speak it. You gotta start trying as early as possible. The biggest proponent of this approach is Irish polyglot Benny Lewis. He takes this very seriously. He is fluent in 7 languages, and he states that he learns a language in 3 months. He says even if you know 10 words, start speaking the language from day 1. Well, to me this is extreme. Many other polyglots start speaking a little later. I prefer to spend 1 month before speaking. But you can try speaking from day 1. This is your own journey. You are going to decide your pace. So you'll make mistakes, there is no doubt about it. Make them with enthusiasm.